Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. And I'll take this opportunity to call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to please call roll.
(10:01).
Thank you. Call the roll, please. Thank you.
Dr. Goodwin. Here. Mr. Mulligan.
Here.
Mr. Soldani. Mr. Robertson.
Here.
Mr. Hartwig.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you very much. All right. That takes us to number 3, the approval of the consent calendar. Do we have any feedback on the minutes? And if not, I'll accept a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
All right.
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 So with that, motion carries, which takes us to number 4. We're moving right along here into our public hearing. So with that, I'm going to open the public hearing, and I'm going to ask all witnesses who intend to testify today to please stand and raise your right hand so the board may swear you in. That includes members of the audience if this is a new part of things. Thank you. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give in the matters pending before the hearing board today shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you. You may be seated. All right. That takes us to 4A. Docket number C-23-21I, an interim variance by Chemical Waste Management, Inc., out of Kettleman City. Everybody's in different orders. Is there a different procedure we're kind of following today?
Slightly, but to the chair, before we begin, I this morning was just provided some documents from Chem Waste, and if you don't mind, if we could take just a short recess so that I can discuss these with my client and, to make sure we understand what is being provided to us.
Okay.
Okay.
5 minutes sufficient, or?
Yeah, I think so. We're just going to go over here to this room over here, and I want to have just a quick discussion.
Okay.
With the district staff.
Yeah, if everybody's fine with that, we'll take a quick 5-minute recess then.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Hey, we're back.
Thank you. Appreciate the accommodation. I think in this particular case, the district is not at this time supporting the request for an interim variance, and so the district would deflect to the petitioner to provide their presentation, and as they have the burden of proof in this particular case. Sure. As in any case, the petitioner always has the burden of proof, but here, given that the district is not fully on board with the petition, then we would
pass
to the petitioners to make their presentation.
Okay. Yeah, this ends forgive me here because this is a different procedure than it usually is for us. So I think we're kind of feeling our way through this as well. So I hope the petitioner will have a little bit of patience as we try to kind of work through this. Typically you kind of come up front. I mean, you're welcome to speak at the podium or you're welcome to speak here. And I don't know if you guys have a presentation or pictures.
We don't have a PowerPoint presentation.
Okay.
We have some exhibits that we're prepared to talk to and have a witness option to take those.
Okay. Feel free.
Make room at the table.
Yeah.
We can just do 2, and if we need.
Yeah, we can definitely scooch down.
Yes.
That's
that's
perfect.
fine.
So, yeah, feel free to have come up here, and then typically we have the petitioner just introduce themselves, just so we kind of know your names and everything like that, and then yeah, feel free to jump right in if you don't mind, and then make sure you turn on the microphones too, please. It's a button on the bottom, right? There's a little red.
Good morning. My name is Tim Miller. I am a Senior Environmental Health and Safety Counsel for Waste Management, parent company for Chemical Waste Management, the petitioner. With me to my left is Raina Verdeen. She's the Environmental Protection Manager for Chemical Waste Management. Also available is Christian Colleen. He is the Director of Air Quality Programs for Waste Management, covering the western region. We also have Bob Henry, the responsible official for Chemical Waste Management's Kettleman Hills facility.
Okay.
We received the staff report yesterday and had an opportunity to review that. From our perspective, this is a typical variance and not your typical variance. So there's two legal standards we contend apply here. One, you know well, the standard for an interim variance, which is good cause, and that's typically if there's a substantial likelihood the petitioner will prevail on a regular variance. The one that you may not be aware of is the standards for variances for air pollution control projects found in Health and Safety Code section 42301.3G. And we have that available for you to review. We think it will be important that we go over that probably before we get into looking at the evidence, because it will demonstrate how our evidence is relevant to our burden of proof. Petitioner and district staff seem to agree that Rule 4311 provided an 18-month period at the minimum for having a compliance project permitted and constructed and be in compliance. We don't believe the staff report notes that 18-month time frame must also include time to construct and not just time to permit. We contend that the staff chronology is incomplete and misses a number of critical events and communications. We have a complete chronology that we believe shows that Chemical Waste Management exercised due diligence, as due diligence is specifically defined in the Health and Safety Code for these types of variances and these types of projects. With that in mind, except for proposed condition number 6 in the staff report, Chemical Waste Management agrees with staff's proposed conditions are appropriate for the period of the interim variance. We contend that those conditions will need to be modified if the hearing board were to grant a regular variance at a later hearing. As I said before, given the special standards that applies to this case, we recommend the hearing board we first get into that particular standard. Should the hearing board deem it necessary, we have Ms. Verdeen here who can testify to the chronology of events, as well as Mr. Colleen. We also have, we believe, online with the public is Haley Roberts, who is from Stantec, and she's the consultant that's assisted us. She lives in Louisiana, and because of the inclement weather conditions, was not able to be here in California. I don't know that we will need Ms. Roberts to provide any information at this point in time. I believe Ms. Verdeen can testify to everything, or Mr. Colleen, but we may need an accommodation if we get into some particularly technical issues that Ms. Roberts assisted us on, if we need her to speak to those directly. So that concludes our opening statement, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Like, I don't know if the district has a response to any of this, or if they're, again, like, this is kind of a new procedure for us here, so.
I'll allow the district to go ahead and give the
Sure.
Can I ask them, do you have a copy of that part of the code?
Yes, I do. We have that available. I'm happy to provide that to the clerk for dissemination at the appropriate time.
Yeah, I think we'll wait until after the.
Good morning. Good morning. Sorry. My name is Estela Soto, and I'm a senior air quality specialist here with the district. So basically, I'm just going to do my usual staff report presentation that the district usually does.
Okay.
So before you is Chemical Waste Management, Inc., Kettleman Hills Facility, which is a commercial class 1-2 hazardous waste designated waste treatment, storage, and disposal facility, and is designated a municipal solid waste disposal facility located in Kings County. The facility has 3 permitted landfills, 1 for the disposal of hazardous waste and industrial solid waste, class 1 and 2, and 2 landfills for the disposal of municipal solid waste and industrial solid waste, class 2 and 3, one of which is currently undergoing closure. The municipal solid waste landfills primarily accept municipal solid waste from the Kings and Fresno County areas, and as required by permit are connected to a gas collection control system. The flare shared by municipal solid waste landfills B17 and B19, which is the subject of this petition, combusts the landfill gas collected as part of the gas collection and control system required by the current Title V permit, along with federal regulations which require emission controls like the flare for the landfills. The landfill gas generated by both municipal solid waste landfills is collected and routed to the existing flare. On December 17th, 2020, District Rule 4311 was amended to require further reductions in NOx emissions. Under the amended standards, the flare is now required to comply with a lower NOx limit of 0.025 pound of NOx per MMBTU by December 31st of 2023. CWMI is currently out of compliance with Rule 4311. Therefore, CWMI has requested an interim variance to be followed by a regular variance to provide relief from the requirements of District Rule 4311. The requested interim variance period would be effective from January 1st through February 21st, 2024 inclusive, or until the petition for the regular variance is heard and granted. If granted, the variance would allow CWMI to continue to operate the flare after December 31st, 2023, until the installation of the new flare that can be completed to demonstrate compliance with Rule 4311. To grant an interim variance, the hearing board must make a finding of good cause. The district believes the good cause determination shall be based on evidence presented to demonstrate that CWMI will be in violation of District Rule 4311 or any rule, regulation, or order of the district, or that such a violation is imminent. That there is some certainty that the 6 findings set forth in the California Health and Safety Code can be made during the subsequent hearing for a regular variance. That the circumstances leading to the violation could not reasonably have been avoided or anticipated by CWMI in sufficient time to provide for public notice of the variance hearing, and that CWMI exercised diligence in petitioning for the interim variance, which shall mean that they did file a variance petition as soon as feasible after the time that they knew or should have known that a variance would more likely than not be necessary. The district and CWMI were communicating closely throughout the engineering evaluation of the ATC project, which included determination if a federal major modification would be triggered for the project. Before dedicating significant resources to that determination, the district asked CWMI if they would prefer to separate the federal major modification determination from the ATC project's rule compliance evaluation, as that would enable the ATC to be issued shortly. Understanding the delay it would have on the issuance of the ATC, CWMI declined the option to separate the federal major modification determination. Ultimately, staff determined that the federal major modification was not triggered. However, the time to reach that determination delayed issuing the ATC for rule compliance purposes. Staff believes that had CWMI decided to separate the ATC project's rule compliance evaluation from its federal major modification determination following staff suggestion, the ATC would have been issued with sufficient time to demonstrate compliance with Rule 4311 by the December 31st, 2023 deadline. Therefore, staff does not support CWMI's variance petition. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask why, and this is kind of more of an informal, so there's going to be a lot of probably back and forth just trying to get to the bottom of it, and there's going to be a lot of questions probably from the board just for your guys' information. I suspect there's going to be a lot of questions. So why did Waste Management, that's probably the easier shorthand, I guess, than CWMI. Why did you guys not want to go why didn't you want to separate it out of
That's a very long question.
Okay.
But or long answer. I will try my best to explain our logic there.
Okay.
The heat limit that was removed was placed in the prior permit to avoid triggering being a major source and having to have offsets, et cetera, for various criteria pollutants. Because the new permit or the new flare would stay below those thresholds, the heat limit wasn't necessary to remain below the major source thresholds based on our calculations. As prudent landfill operators, We need to be able to remove as much landfill gas as possible to maintain proper controls in the landfill. If you want to see what happens when you don't do that, I suggest you pay attention to what's happening currently in South Coast of Chiquita Canyon, among other landfills that don't properly manage their landfill gas. So by removing that limit, we then removed an impediment to disposing of landfill gas in the future when we may or may not know we need it. Our experience thus far has been getting modifications to permits to change permit conditions takes months. You don't always have months in operating a landfill to make changes to what's going on with your landfill gas and how you're getting rid of it. But there's a lot more to what went on there in the time frame that we don't believe is accurately reflected in the staff report.
Andy?
So that justifies why you want the limit removed, but why not the separation?
Well, the problem is you're assuming that you're taking at face value that separation was a major delay. If you'd like, I can hand you our timeline and our chronology. That issue was resolved in 7 weeks over the course of 18 months.
And
The permit sat for 1 day short of 6 months. We submitted it on June 22nd, 2022. Our first contact from staff on our application occurred on December 21st, 2022. This issue was brought to our attention in April of 2023. By May 23rd of 2023, we had submitted an analysis to district staff showing that the major modification was not triggered.
So you did the district staff work for them?
We did the work to
essentially.
show that it did not trigger offsets if we did it the way we were wanting to do it. And it took us 7 weeks once this issue was brought to our attention to do it. But let's also be clear about what this issue is. This issue is about whether or not offsets were triggered. That's $1 million issue. We have an email here that in December shows that district staff represented to us that offsets were not triggered. District staff came back to us in late March or early April and said, oh, no, offsets are now triggered. That's $1 million issue halfway through the 18-month period. And we resolved it in 7 weeks.
You have your timeline. I think you had asked to present your timeline and I think some other documentation as well. I think of
and so I'll hand these over to the clerk to handle that part of it, Christian. That's the Health and Safety Code section. Here's the timeline. Here's the chronology that the timeline's based on.
Yeah, let me just take a look real quick because I just want to kind of see. I know we've seen the district's timeline here, but is that what is that? Are these here? These are all different documents.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's 3 different. You should have 3 different documents.
Okay, so I guess I'll take that and pass
These
it
are
on.
all the same, I think.
I gave the
Yeah, I
clerk
think
8
we-
based on the normal submission. So if there's more than that up there, staff's.
Should have spread out so we had more room. Look at all the documents here. Thanks. I think I have this. Jerry, you got this one?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks. And then it's Ella to you. I'm assuming you probably might want a copy of that as well. And then everybody gets this full out one. Did you get that? Dr. There you go. And Estella, I think you get this one as well. And
Is there a time for staff response to what they had submitted, or
Yes, I would
wait?
suggest
Okay,
that they be allowed the opportunity to provide their.
okay.
yeah,
And then staff responds to-
I think that'd be the most organized way to probably go through this. Otherwise, we'll just end up in a bunch of back and forth. You guys mind if we just take a couple seconds just to try to review some of this while we're, like I said, a lot of this information we got yesterday, so we're also.
As did we.
I don't think so. Jerry, do you have any extras? I think that was all of them.
Are you short? I might have an extra timeline here.
I just don't have extras of the timeline.
You know what, I've got one more here.
We don't
Okay,
need that, I'm
okay.
sending them back, I just want to make sure.
Oh, I do, I have one extra, I'm sorry, I ended up with, actually, I ended up with two. Just got budgeted. I ended up with three.
Apologies for the fine print.
Who or what is,
Sitting there thinking, where's the magnifying glass? I'm sorry.
who or what is Stantec?
Stantec is our paid consultant that helped us with the technical aspects.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want this to?
My grab, is there the blue timeline? Is there one?
There's another one here.
I need the extra anyway. You guys let me know when you guys are ready to proceed.
Under comment then, required finding, it says the Southern Region Hearing Board.
I'm sorry, that's a typo. It should be Central Region.
Yeah.
I think we're in the wrong place.
It's like, we'll push it off onto those guys. That sounds a lot better. That's it. It's on, yeah, it was on like the second page of the conditions, I think, or third page of the conditions, yeah. This must be really exciting for the lady that's on Zoom. This,
That's what I think it is. She heard it all yesterday.
it must be really exciting to hear it the second time then. So. Jerry, you about ready to go?
Yeah, I'm
Start
ready.
the good one? All right, so please proceed with your presentation here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wanted to be responsive to the board's questions, but I would like to, again, bring it back around to first discussing the relevant standard. And so I believe you were all taking a look, and I highlighted in the margin the relevant portion of that particular part of the Health and Safety Code. So the findings that this board needs to be looking at for the purposes of the interim variance and the substantial likelihood is really whether or not we exercised due diligence, which meets the finding under 42352A2. A3, 4, and 5 by statute, this board doesn't need to make today. So the question is, did we exercise due diligence? And on the top of page 3 of the handout with the statute, it says due diligence means the following conditions exist. And I want to pause there. It doesn't say including but not limited to. It says the following conditions exist. The air pollution control project proposed by the applicant was reasonably expected to achieve compliance with the pertinent emission standard limitation. Considering our application was approved by district staff, I think we've met that one. The applicant submitted the permit application in sufficient time for the district to act upon the application and for the applicant to complete the project in accordance with the deadline. We submitted our application in advance of the rule deadline. And 18 months theoretically was enough time for it to be permitted and constructed. And this is the one I really want to emphasize because I think this goes to a lot of the questions the board was asking. The applicant responded in a reasonable time to request for additional information needed by the district to process the application or prepare any environmental analyses. Not that every decision we made was the most expedient, even though our application was the same throughout. The district had 18 months. All of the information that was required by rule was there. This change that took everyone by surprise was there in the application when it was filed. It wasn't a result of a change. We responded in a reasonable time, and we will walk through the timeline in more detail to explain why that is. The district has not denied or proposed to deny the application. The authority to construct was granted 2 weeks after we submitted the variance application. And during the term of the variance, the applicant will take practical steps to ensure completion of the project as expediently as possible after the issuance of the permit. We have already been working with our contractors to secure start dates, et cetera, and we can go into more detail on that. So it seems that the critical aspect is, did we respond in a reasonable time? And if you look at the timeline, you can break that down into 3 or 4 points. So the first section is between June 22nd, 2022, all the way on the left when we submitted the application, until December 21st, 2022, when staff first reached out and said, hey, we're working on your application. 1/3 of the 18-month timeline to permit and construct the project had elapsed before staff contacted us and asked for any information. Between December 21st and July 21st, if you look at that period, there's constant communication between the petitioner and district staff. And for the most part, we're turning around responses in a matter of days or weeks. The longest period it took in that time frame to respond was when this issue came up about whether or not it was a major modification, and we provided the analysis showing that offsets were not required within 7 weeks. July 21st, staff tells us, well, actually earlier in July, we're provided a draft authority to construct by staff. We spend the next couple of weeks going over those draft conditions with staff. On July 21st, 2023, we were told that the draft ATC was going to be sent to EPA for review because we're a Title V facility. We were told that was supposed to happen on July 24th, 2023. Still a tight timeline to construct, but we were, it's one thing to come in and say we need a variance because we need more time to construct. It's another thing to come in for a variance and say we can't construct because we don't have the permit we need to do it. And that's the emphasis of 42301.3G. We need action from district staff before we can break ground. In fact, district staff made that clear to us in our September 18th meeting. If we even poured a foundation, we were subject to fines for constructing without a permit. So come July, we're under the impression that district staff did what they said they were going to do on July 24th and provided the permit to EPA for their 45-day comment period. So July 1 comes around and we have heard nothing from district staff. And we know we need to get started on construction. Where's our permit? EPA should be done with their 45-day review period. September 18th, we have the meeting where we're told, well, that hadn't happened.
When you say that hadn't happened.
The EPA, the permit had not been sent to EPA.
Okay.
We were asked to submit a timeline explaining what our construction schedule was going to be. We asked if there would be a compliance advisory. Did we need to worry about fines, whatever the case may be in that conversation? I can have Ms. Verdeen testify to her understanding of that meeting with district staff.
At that time, did the air district know that, I think it's 104, I'm somewhere in here, 142 days for the construction timeline or something like that, right? Or am I off on the timeline for how long it's gonna take to construct this?
The 140, it's going to be more than 142 days. That was our estimate on the excess emissions period. But I don't know what district staff knew at that particular point in time about the construction schedule.
Or do you have any?
Well, so in that September meeting, we had asked for both compliance and permitting staff to be on the meeting because we felt we were potentially going to be at risk. So we specifically asked for compliance staff to be on the call so that we can be provided direction. What do we need to do? Will there be a compliance advisory issued? We also asked if we were the only facility in this situation, and we were told we were not. So we asked for direction. What do we want to do next? At that point, compliance staff told us that they recommended that we provide a timeline for how long it would take the flare to construct and get source tested on whatever day the ATC was issued, right? Just whatever day the ATC is issued, how long is it going to take you to construct that? And so we asked, again, if there would be a compliance advisory, and it was reiterated to us, we recommend that you submit this timeline. And so that was prepared and submitted in October, along with a summary of all the permitting activities that occurred, most of the permitting activities that occurred prior.
Ms. Verdeen, if I may, was it your understanding, having left that meeting, that a compliance advisory might be issued?
My understanding was it was unclear what direction the district was going to take. And so if we provided this timeline that we were told other people might be providing as well, this was going to at least help provide some direction on what the next steps were going to be. It was not clear to me that we weren't going to be provided a compliance advisory for the district at that time.
Okay. I'm sorry, any other questions or at this time, or proceed if there's none?
So we submitted the requested timeline on October the 26th. We received no acknowledgement. It's my understanding we received no acknowledgement from district staff that we had actually submitted that. So at that point in time, we began our work to prepare for a variance. And by the time it became clear that a compliance advisory wasn't going to be issued and that we were not going to be getting our permit, we filed for our interim variance on December the 13th, 2023. December the 26th, the permit was issued. The ATCs, draft ATCs were actually, at that point, their final ATCs were issued. So again, from our perspective, the critical period based on the statutory standard, did we respond in a reasonable time to request to the district for information?
Any other?
Our contention is the timeline says we did.
That concludes your presentation for the moment, or?
Yes.
Okay.
I'd like to know what our staff is. Do you agree with?
Well, I think staff is going to make their kind of presentation or have a response, I would assume. To...
Can I ask a question of the petitioner?
Sure.
Raina, when you had the meetings with the compliance, I think it was joint meetings, compliance and PSD staff, who was do you recall who the compliance staff?
I don't want to butcher his last name, but Loopy.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was present at that as well, so.
And by compliance advisory is or a guidance of what the compliance department thought your best options were at that point?
Well, we were specifically, are we going to be enforced on if we don't meet this
Yeah.
timeline? We asked that question.
Yeah.
And then and we were told, we're not going to tell you one way or the other, this isn't the place for that. We recommend that you submit this timeline. And then we asked about clarification on construction, just because, we were getting other permits, building permits, that kind of thing at the same time. And so we asked about that question, and there was a clarification made to us that if, the cement pad was going to be exclusively for this control equipment, then it would be considered construction and it would be enforced on if we didn't have the appropriate permit.
So during that meeting, you were if the 142 days, if we're using that, your horizon's too short for the compliance in October.
Potentially. I didn't have the timeline available to me at that time in September when we had that meeting.
Okay.
So I couldn't tell you that I knew it was 142 days because I didn't know that at that time.
But in October, you guys did for sure. I mean, that's when you gave it to us, or is that?
In October, I provided the timeline,
Okay.
correct, October 26th.
So, does the district have a presentation or response or?
Oh, may I, sorry, my name is Brian Clerico. I'm the supervising air quality engineer here. And I was the lead engineer on the project. I wasn't the processing engineer, but anyway, I'm aware of some of these dates. One thing I'd like to ask, just to, you can jog my memory, but in February this year, or up until February, was Chemwaste proposing sort of a generic compliant flare, you didn't have a specific proposal?
In the application, we originally had proposed 2 different models.
Mhm.
We hadn't decided yet which model we were going to do, so we had proposed 2. In December, when the district permitting staff first approached us, they notified us that there was going to be a federal major mod needed. That triggered the conversations that we had in early January, where we indicated that we had a conversation with district permitting staff about not wanting to trigger federal major mod. We spoke and we said, well, this equipment is backed and the offsets are not, you're going to be exempted from offsets. So knowing all of that, do you want to still pursue this question of projected actuals and baselines and all that, or do you just want to accept the federal major mod? At that time, because it was backed and we thought we were exempt from the offsets, we decided we'll go ahead and move forward with the federal major mod, and we were requested for the certificate of compliance at that time. Between January and February, there were some questions that came up regarding which flare we were going to choose because the ambient air quality model was not passing. And so at that point, we let the district staff know that we had chosen a specific flare, and with that flare, the model was going to pass. And so under that time, we felt we were, there were some clarifications as we went along, a new number, that kind of thing. And it wasn't until April that we were told that we were no longer going to be eligible for the offsets. And so at that point, we started the conversation of going back to where we were in January relative to using the projected actuals and the unused baseline in order to not require the offsets for the project.
Right, yeah. That's consistent with what I recall about the project. So I thank you. You have more specific information there. But yes, so I think up until or through February, we weren't able to get the project to pass what we call an ambient air quality analysis, and that's one of the requirements in our new source review rule. But with the proposal of a specific flare and specific emissions related to that, and it did pass, and so the project was submitted for review. And it was at the end of March we discovered that the project couldn't be as we thought. We thought it could be considered a project done solely for rule compliance. But then we noticed, because of the heat input question, that's the thing where they needed the increased heat input to the flare, that we could no longer classify that as a project solely for rule compliance. And at that point, that's where we suggested they possibly separate those 2 things, the flare replacement for 4311 compliance and the heat input limit. But so yeah, it wasn't until the very end of March, beginning of April, that that was really known and then communicated to Chemwaste.
So I guess, why is the district opposing the variance? I guess that's kind of, I haven't seen that before, so I'm actually just curious, what is the thought process or what's the reasoning behind it?
The crux of it, Daniel, it gets down to, I know we've talked about this separation issue a lot and the timing of it, but we feel that we were suggesting, the district feels that our permit services department was suggesting to separate those in time. They could have met the 140-day timeline. So that's the crux of our not supporting it.
So you're saying that the April till July, that 3 months basically was, if I'm understanding correct, it was July when you guys decided that.
So we were informed in April, early April, that we were no longer going to be exempted from the offsets. And so that's when we got with district staff and said, well, can we take you back to the equation we wanted to propose in January for the projected actuals and the unused baseline, and then provide the calculations that show that we'll net zero and therefore no longer, not have to use the offsets. Obviously, the crux for us there was the offsets, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all know that can be quite expensive. So that work was done, and we submitted those calculations, I believe, on May 23rd. Stantec submitted those on our behalf. Then in June, we got direction from permitting staff that those had been approved, that had been looked at and it was going to go through. And we were requested one small clarification, and we provided that in June. And then at the end of June, we were provided draft ATCs. So we were under the impression at that time that what we had proposed had been accepted and incorporated into the draft ATCs. So by mid-July, we believe that we were going to start the process for the 45-day public comment and submittal to EPA.
You guys have questions? Go ahead, Jerry.
Just one thought is, the district is opposed approval because of the separation, they didn't accept the separation. But the petitioners, his stand is, did they show due diligence? Do we have an argument there, but they're showing due diligence? Are you on board with that timeline or their proposal there?
I just want to clarify, just because, we have made our stand is that we wanted them to separate because that would have provided time. It sounds like, and you guys were aware that might have speeded up the rule project, but it seems like you guys felt you were confident that you had information that you could do the calculation and provide with the projected limit, that you wouldn't have to do offsets. And I totally understand the offsets. That VOC offsets for that project were going to be substantial. So once did you have that information though? When did you have that information where you thought you could do the calculations in?
So the original thought process for us using the projected actuals and unused, we were ready to use in January because we were originally notified that we were going to have to do a federal major mod in that December email. So at that point, we suggested, using this equation to zero us out, right? But with our conversation with the district permitting staff, it turned out, well, you're already backed, you're going to be exempted from offset, so let's not pursue that. Go ahead and pursue, and we agreed that we would go ahead with the federal major mod at that point. So, and not until April were we told, hey, again, you're not going to enjoy the offset exemption. So that's when we said, well, can we take it back to that equation that we were going to use in January so that we can zero out. Now, in at least one email correspondence, we were led to believe that it wasn't going to cause a delay. And so that's why we continued to process that direction. Obviously, we didn't want the offset, but we were looking at that heat input because it is an arbitrary limit. We were not changing the emissions that were going into or we're not changing the amount of tonnage going into the landfill. We weren't changing any other operating other than we were installing a new flare for rule compliance. But we wanted the heat input to be reflective of the equipment that we were installing, which we thought, again, the emissions are to be lower in the effort to meet the rule compliance. So that's why we stood on, we wanted to get the heat input to reflect the equipment that was going to be installed.
Oh, I'll just say, yeah, that I understand why they would need the heat input limit increase, maybe for future increases, and that certainly makes sense. But the reason it is an NSR limit, it's a new source review limit, it's an enforceable limit, and it does affect how we process the permit. So it's not a trivial, thing to change in terms of the processing.
Right, Andy?
Yeah, but ultimately that federal major modification wasn't necessary, right? or was deemed not applicable in this case, right?
That's right, with the projected actual emissions and then another term, we were able to show it wasn't a federal major modification. They had to accept another limit on their permit in terms of I forget if it's a 5 or 10-year horizon.
Right, so we had to accept the projected actual emissions for a 5-year window, and we'll have to do some annual reporting to the district, and that would be a condition in the permit.
Right. Whereas before, yeah, that's what we were not having to go that route. It was okay if it was a federal major modification, if it was solely for rule compliance, because if it was solely for rule compliance, federal law gave them an offset exemption for rule compliance projects.
CWMI did their own calculations to determine whether this was applicable, right? And you submitted that work to
With our
district staff.
consultant.
How long did it take the consultant?
That was the correspondence that we did between April and April.
Approximately 7 weeks.
Okay.
May
Do you know what
23rd.
the actual touch time was? I mean, how much actual hands-on calculation?
I don't know that at this particular point in
Okay.
time.
That sounds like
But-
due diligence to me. You did your own work in advance, not waiting on district staff, and you provided that work to district staff. What's the district staff response to that? It sounds like due diligence to me.
Yes, I would say they're responsive. I mean, in terms of, I don't know that was the, I mean, we did get a draft together in June, I believe. You know, there was a little additional work we had to do. I mean, nothing is, comes, pre-baked that we can use wholly. There are some, one of the things that complicated all the landfill projects we had was some EPA guidance or reverse guidance that we became aware of in the fall on the applicability of, or how we were to apply certain federal new source performance standards and we'll call it NESHAP, National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants. There's these regulations, and EPA had some change in guidance in the fall that we became aware of that at that point, we had to take a very careful review of all our landfill projects to make sure those were as consistent as they could be with that revised guidance.
Okay. I'll bring up one other thing. I took a look at this Rule 4311 and the requirement and the amendment. And it seems to me these landfills had two options. One was either to decrease throughput or comply with the new limits. If you were going to decrease throughput, you had to do so. And then if you got into a situation where your throughput exceeded a certain amount for 2 years, then you had to apply for a new flare. Okay. Now this wasn't the case with CWMI. You said we need to comply with the new limit, so you submitted your application for the A to C. Okay. And that deadline was July 1st of 22, and you got it in on time. Okay. But to demonstrate compliance was December 31st of 23, 18 months. The reason I bring this up is if a landfill that decides to go to throughput, but they then find themselves in a situation where their throughput is exceeded for 2 years, now they have to go through the same process of upgrading their flare or replacing it. But that timeline is April 15th of the year following that you find that you're exceeding, and you have to demonstrate compliance by December 31st of that same year. That's only 8.5 months. These guys had 18 months. I don't understand why it took so long, where you're requiring, in one instance here, 8.5 months. That's processing time for the A to C. Then you've got construction time, and then you've got to hire the source tester to get in. And that's a burden on staff to turn that application right away. And I think it's your contention that they didn't they didn't turn it quickly enough.
We did not receive the ATC in time for us to be able to be in compliance to construct the project and be in compliance by 12/31/2023. At this point, that fact is the fact.
Yeah.
I don't want to get off in speculating what could be, what might have, whatever the case may be, as I don't believe that's relevant.
So I guess I had a couple questions here as well in terms, so we had a draft ATC back in, late June, it looks like, that's correct? And then, what, was there a lot of negotiation, or what took so long to kind of get to a final, ATC?
So in the chronology and in the timeline, you'll see that on June, I think it was 28th, we got a draft. We requested a meeting with permitting staff to go over. We had small comments. And in early July, they issued us a second draft that had gone through compliance, that had revisions for their comments. It wasn't a lot of comments to it. That's why on the July 21st correspondence, we believed we were ready to go. And the absence of notification, anything, is what prompted us on September 1st to reach out to say what's going on, what's the status of that.
And at what point did the district know about the 142-day construction window? I don't know if that's in.
I wasn't involved in the meeting, but I was assuming that's in the October meeting. Is that correct, Raina?
So we had the September meeting. I speculate that October 26th, the day I sent the notice with the timeline, is probably when you had that specific number, that 142.
Okay.
If I may, it certainly wasn't going to be constructed in 5 days before December 26th and December 31st.
That's a fair observation. Yeah. Does the Air District agree? I mean, that the 423013, I mean, that's applicable. I mean, that's an applicable statute for this situation. The due diligence that was passed earlier, the California Health and Safety Code, 42301.
The district agrees that the standard of review, the standard applicable to deciding this case is as petitioner presented it under 42301.3 G2.
I just wanted to speak to that on number 2D under that same code. When did the district actually deny this or advise them that they were going to deny?
They haven't been denied.
I thought they had been denied.
No, they got the authority to construct.
Okay.
So
they never had a denial of this action. Okay.
I think what's at issue here is probably just the timeline more than anything. Is probably the bigger question. That's the way I kind of see it, at least.
Yeah, I will say, the project, well, as originally proposed, when we did the ambient air quality analysis, it wasn't passing. That's not really a denial at that point. It's sort of where we get more refined information from the source. They provide us additional information. In this case, it was the specific flare they were actually proposing to install. We sort of move forward. We move forward past those, approval requirements. We have to make sure they're met, and we don't always know what they are until we encounter them in detail as we work through those regulations.
And I apologize, this got asked here. I mean, so what was the delay then between? I'm not sure I understand what the delay was on issuing the ATCs. If we had kind of a draft back in June, and then what kind of held it up? I know there was some. You talked about it had to go to EPA for comment review. Is there a better? Can I get a better understanding, I guess, of what kind of took so long between?
Well, I probably can't give you a perfect answer on that, but I do know there were, a lot of projects in for review at that time. and then particularly where landfills were concerned, I think the district was being, attempting to incorporate recent EPA guidance on these new federal regulations. And then later in the fall, when EPA Region 9 revised that guidance, we were doing our best to ensure consistency with that guidance. And those are extensive. I mean, these are long permits, and they're very complicated. So I think we were doing our best to ensure consistency with Region 9 guidance.
And I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I mean, I think, I think we all recognize the burden on staff is that it's, these are difficult things to review and everything like that. I don't mean to ever, try to, discourage is the wrong word here, but I mean, I know you guys have a tough job, so I don't think any of us are ever trying to, whatever the word is, discount how hard it is you guys are working on that stuff. But is there any more comments, questions?
Just curious, what's the difference between the new stack and the old stack? Is it a more efficient burner or flare? Is there
About 20 feet.
That's it.
You can come up here, you could just go to the podium if you want, whatever's easier for you.
We can hear you.
Yeah, we're good.
The new flare is what we call an ultra low NOx flare, and it's a completely different design than the current flare, which we just call a regular enclosed flare, which has low NOx burners. And the difference is in the ultra low NOx flares, it mixes the combustion air prior with the fuel to combustion. In the standard flare, they have louvers and the air is mixed at the combustion. So through that diluents, you go from a NOx of 0.6 pounds per million BTU to 0.5, where 0.5 is what we were permitted at, to down to 0.025. So it's a much different flare in how it operates with this mixing. And so it has a combustion air blower that you didn't have before and a mixing plenum, and then it all comes together. And the burners are completely different in how they're constructed. So it's a lot more expensive flare to install than the standard enclosed flare. And they work pretty well, but they have much lower emission profile than the standard enclosed flares.
Is the old flare operating today?
Yes, sir. And then once we get the new one constructed and proved out, we'll turn that old one off, keep the new one running, make sure everything's proved out, and then eventually we'll decommission the existing flare and run on the new flare.
So just to clarify, so you guys are, I mean, you got your APCs, the day after Christmas, but I'm assuming are you guys in the process of implementing that at this point? That's.
So we submitted our minor modification last week to EPA for review. One of the things we did do was waive the certificate of conformity so that we could get the ATC sooner. So we did submit that last week, and then currently our project engineer is working with the construction companies to provide us a final date for start.
My understanding is because of availability of the concrete contractor and then trying to avoid too much damage to groundwork if inclement weather were to occur, we're working backwards. So we anticipate starting site preparation for the concrete foundation around February the 5th. And then within a couple of weeks after that, we've been told is when the concrete contractor would be able to come and pour the foundation, and things would go from there. The flare itself is constructed, it is paid for, and so it is in storage with the manufacturer. And as soon as we're ready for them to start shipping it out so that it can arrive in time to be offloaded onto the foundation, they'll start moving it to the site, but it is constructed and awaiting our instructions to ship.
It is kind of crazy how hard it is to get concrete right now. I don't understand, but it is. It's really hard to get concrete. And I guess one more question I had then, what kind of fines or would they be looking at if this was to be denied? I mean, what type of penalty structure is that looking at for waste management?
The difference in the actual, so they will be paying, say if they were granted a variance, they will pay excess emission, which is $2.75 a pound. They're looking at 740 or so excess pounds of NOx. If they got an NOV, those 742 pounds of NOx would be a penalty of $5 per pound. So there's that poundage difference, $2.25. So maybe $1,500, $1,600, $1,700 more compared to excess emissions and just the excess emissions penalty for an NOV. Although they would also get a base penalty, and they're an ability 5. There's an ability factor required by the California Health and Safety Code. So their base penalty would be $5,000. So you're looking at maybe compared to a variance, if you counted their petition fees and stuff, if you're just looking at numbers, $6,000 or $7,000 they would be saving by getting a variance. I know there's obviously other issues for getting a variance other than the dollars and cents of a penalty. But it's just as far as penalties, that's what they would, if these excess emissions turn out, because they have to submit a summary report.
Sure.
We'll look at that. We'll calculate the excess emissions. We do the same thing with an NOV. We just look at their, that flare has a meter on it.
The petitioner also brought up, I think, on condition 6. I think that if your petition was granted, that you had an issue with, I guess, turning in those reports every 10 days.
Our understanding is deviation reports for Title V permits are about deviations from the operating conditions of a Title V permit. None of the conditions relating to this flare are in our Title V permit at this particular point in time. So it's not clear to us how we submit a deviation report saying we're deviating from a permit condition that doesn't exist.
When the new conditions have started on January 1 though, for the new standard, or when?
Our current Title V permit does not contain any conditions that we're aware of relating to the operation of the flare that we're deviating from.
I don't know, staff have any?
I don't have an immediate response to that.
What's the estimated cost of this construction project?
Approximately $2 million.
Condition 6 just says that you will submit within 10 days if a permit condition is violated. It's not saying you're going to have to do it. So it's just a statement that I think it's just a boilerplate Title V reporting condition.
If that is simply a statement of if then we have no concerns with that condition being in the variance at this particular point in time. We will work through with compliance staff at this point as to whether the if has occurred so that the then happens.
Yeah. Does staff concur with that?
I think I would concur with that. I think I would concur that if a title, that's the way it reads. If a deviation report shall be submitted to the district within 10 days each time a federal Title V permit condition is violated. Okay. If no Title V permit condition is violated, then there's no report. Okay. Inapplicability of that requirement.
With that, I assume you're good with the
for the term of the interim variance. We are fine with those conditions presented by staff. We may have additional comments if staff proposes the same conditions for a regular variance.
All right. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns? I appreciate the thoughtfulness, Andy. That was helpful. So, I mean, I can tell you where I'm at. I would be inclined actually to grant the variance. I think, it seems like there's a lot of time in here, and it's just difficult for if you've done everything you're trying to do. I mean, as somebody that's trying to stay above board and everything like that, I 108 or 18 months seems like a pretty long time, but in this case, it doesn't. It should have been enough time, I guess, is where I'm kind of at with it. So,
I confirm that their timelines match up,
yeah.
comparing one to the other that I can see from what was submitted.
Any other thoughts, or Dr. Goodwin? I mean,
No, I agree. I think they were showing diligence and are responding quickly. And seems like most of the problem was in the beginning. And yeah.
so if that's, or Andy, if you have something else to say.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I move to approve Chemical Waste Management Incorporated's petition for an interim variance set forth in docket number C-23-21I upon the basis that good cause exists as set forth in the staff report, and that there is likelihood that the 6 findings required by the Health and Safety Code will be met at a later hearing. The variance shall be effected for the period January 1, 2024 to February 21, 2024, or until the petition for regular variance can be heard, whichever occurs first, and shall be subject to conditions on pages 4 to 5 of the staff report.
Do I have a second?
Second?
All right. Clerk, if you'd please call the roll.
Dr. Goodwin?
Yes.
Mr. Mulligan?
Yes.
Mr. Soldani? Mr. Robertson?
Yes.
Mr. Hartwig?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. All right. I'll let you guys work out how how this is gonna all proceed. So, thank you, guys. I appreciate everybody's time. This was actually interesting. So
We'll see you next month.
yeah, probably. You guys, you guys can all take off. I mean, yeah. All right. Let's see. Then. All right. That takes us then. You guys are free. You guys are free to go. So, and thank you for the presentation. So, that takes us to item number 5, which is public comments. Do we have any member of the public that wishes to comment on any matter that might come before this board, or is there anybody online that wishes to make a comment?
No public comments, no comments online.
Thank you very much. All right, hearing board comments. Do we have any comments from the members of our board here? All right. New business. So next month is when we do our officer, or we elect officers again. Am I correct on that?
Public hearing board members, their term ends at the end of February, so
Oh, okay, would be March.
it will be, yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, I knew it was coming up at some point. So. All right, that was any other new business anybody wants to bring to the fore? Seeing none, that takes us to number 8, which is adjournment. So, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.